something.
There you go. You got it.
Okay. Hopefully it's recording to my computer. Okay. Recording. Okay. Well, hopefully it will record to my computer. Maybe we should just go ahead and get started since we're getting in a little bit late. Again, good morning. My name is Lisa Jacobson. I'm a reference archivist at the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We are the national archives for the Presbyterian Church USA and its predecessor denominations. We were founded in 1852 and are the oldest denominational archives in the United States. Most of the information for this presentation I've culled from James Smiley's A Brief History of the Presbyterians, as well as a really wonderful book written by James Bullock called Heritage and Hope, A Story of Presbyterians in Florida. And I apologize, I do have a script I'll be reading from to kind of keep myself on track, but you probably don't really want to be looking at me the whole time. So let me share my screen and okay, I'll try the slideshow. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, good. Let me hit. Okay, let's get rolling here. Our core mission at PHS is to collect, preserve, and share. We collect the records of congregations, mid-councils, and national agencies, in addition to like some parachurch organizations, such as Presbyterians United for Biblical Concerns. We also collect the personal papers of missionaries and ministers. The Society serves as the repository for the records of the National Council of the Churches of Christ and the Religious News Service. This is a picture of the exterior of our building in Philadelphia in nice spring weather, which I'm hoping will come soon with the leaves on the trees. Presbyterians have been part of the United States of America going back to the early colonial era. Born out of the Protestant Reformation in Europe, Presbyterianism was shaped largely through the work of John Calvin, seen on the left here on the slide, and John Knox on the right. In the 1640s, the Assembly of the Divines met at Westminster Abbey to produce the Westminster Confession of Faith and the larger and shorter catechisms, which are still used by the church. The assembly also produced a directory of worship and Presbyterian polity. Conflict in the British Isles drove many Presbyterians to emigrate to America in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Southampton Presbyterian Church on Long Island, formed in about 1640, is considered to be the oldest Presbyterian congregation in America. Francis McKemey, whose work in founding churches in America earned him the title Father of American Presbyterianism, arrived in 1683 from Ireland. In 1707, McKemey was tried for preaching without a license in New York City. It was an early religious liberty case. He was acquitted, but cases of this type led the founders of the United States to write the freedom of religion into the US Constitution. In the image on the left, McKemey is the individual standing with his arm raised. McKemey was a slaveholder, and he used profits from enslaved labor in Barbados and Virginia to fund his church plantings in the colony of Maryland. The map on the right shows some of those early churches there in Maryland. Due to considerable growth in the number of Presbyterians in the American colonies during this time, the need arose for a formal structure. The first presbytery was organized in 1706. The image on the right is the first page of the first minutes of the presbytery. and it was called just the Presbytery. The first synod was organized in 1716 when the need arose for more than one presbytery. Those first presbyteries were Philadelphia, Newcastle, and Long Island. During the 18th century, the vast majority of Presbyterian congregations were concentrated in the mid-Atlantic, but there were early churches in Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. The Great Awakening, which saw a move toward revivalism, led to the split into New Side and Old Side factions in 1741, with the Synod of Philadelphia being New Side and the Synod of New York Old Side. This division was primarily between life of the heart and the life of the mind. Those that were motivated by evangelical fervor versus those who subscribed to traditional ritual and doctrine. A reunion was brokered in 1758 when both synods agreed to accept the Westminster Confession and Catechisms as an orthodox system of Christian doctrine, together with the Directory for Worship and the discipline that they inherited from the Reformed community in the British Isles. They pledged to conduct church meetings decently and in order, allowing freedom of discussion and protest.
Yay.
In addition, they agreed to evaluate candidates to the ministry based on their knowledge of the Bible and their personal piety, together with the acceptance of the doctrinal standards of the church. The period of the Revolutionary War brought great changes, certainly. Although divided by the call for independence, most Presbyterians supported the revolutionary cause. 12 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Presbyterian, including Reverend John Witherspoon. The first General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in the USA met in Philadelphia in 1789, where a new constitution of the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America was ratified. This is the precursor of the current Book of Order. The new denomination struggled along with the new nation to establish itself. There was strong interest in ecumenical, mission, and educational endeavors, as well as maintaining a commitment to decency and order. So I hope you can see the very bottom of the slide. My apologies if it's a little bit cut off. So I think during the early republic, certainly the population of the US grew along the eastern seaboard and expanded westward. Presbyterians cooperated with Congregationalists in the planting of new congregations in a plan of union, which was formally adopted in 1801. The plan intended to curb competition between the two denominations for members. Congregations could call either a Presbyterian or a congregational minister to fill their pulpits. The General Assembly established a standing committee on missions as early as 1802, showing a strong commitment to missionary endeavors. In 1810, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions was born as an ecumenical effort between Presbyterians and Congregationalists. While the early Presbyterian Church in the USA did ordain a few African American men to the ministry, the denomination was predominantly white and generally intolerant of racial inclusion. For those Black men admitted to the ministry, they were relegated to serving congregations that were established solely for African Americans. The first such congregation was the First African Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia, organized in 1807. And Reverend John Gloucester was their first pastor. Conflicts between staunch conservatives who adhered to Presbyterian polity and running the church in a decent and orderly manner, and those who supported revivals and emphasized being moved by the Spirit, led to early divisions in the church. Barton Stone, who was an early minister in the Presbyterian Church USA, was strongly opposed to creeds and felt the Bible alone should be the sole guide. He broke away from the church and formed what is the Disciples of Christ denomination. In 1810, You saw a division between Presbyterians that led to the formation of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Conflict over the requirements for the education and licensure of candidates for the ministry, as well as disagreement over Calvinistic doctrine of predestination and revivalistic methods, largely led to this division. Presbyterians as a whole stood for a well-educated ministry. They gave considerable attention to establishing theological seminaries. Princeton Theological Seminary in New Jersey and Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia were both founded in 1812. And Columbia Theological Seminary in South Carolina, which is now located in Decatur, Georgia, was organized in 1828. Numerous colleges and universities were also established by Presbyterians in the early republic, education being seen as the handmaiden of religion. Such schools were essential for the Christianizing and civilizing of America. Presbyterians gave increasing attention to Christian education in the early 19th century. In 1816, Isabella Graham and her daughter Joanna Bethune founded the Promotion of Sabbath Schools in New York City. In Philadelphia, a Presbyterian layman, Alexander Henry, started a Sunday and Adult School Union, which became the American Sunday School Union in 1817. We hold the records of the ASSU at PHS. Finally, to Florida. In 1821, the United States obtained the territory of Florida from Spain. At this time, there were no organized groups of Presbyterians in the Florida territory. The first Presbyterians began arriving in St. Augustine. Am I pronouncing that right?
Augustine.
It's Augustine, okay. I heard it the other day and somebody said Augustine. I'm like, oh, okay. So, okay, Augustine.
We call it August.
Okay, I thought so. But on October 31st, that's kind of Reformation Sunday time period, 1823, a petition was sent to the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia to organize a Presbyterian society in St. Augustine. The first Presbyterian church in St. Augustine, Florida was organized on July 20th, 1824, with Reverend William McWeir as the pastor. The image on the slide is like the current sanctuary. It's now called, I believe, Memorial Presbyterian Church. Florida was granted statehood in 1845. Wars of Indian removal certainly took place in the, through the 1830s and into the early 1840s. The federal government engaged in an extended military campaign designed to drive Florida's native inhabitants from the territory. Let's see what to go with that. So the government land office issued over 1,000 permits for 189,440 acres to heads of household who agreed to cultivate at least 5 acres of land and to live on it for 5 years. A surge of people immigrated from Georgia and South Carolina for the land permits, and among them were Presbyterians. On January 24th, 1841, the Presbytery of Florida, and I believe that is the predecessor presbytery of your current Presbytery of Central Florida, was constituted by the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia. It included about 50,000 square miles through the state of Florida when it was first organized. And in the 1840s, I don't know how easy it was to communicate or travel. So that was quite a job to sort of get, the Presbyterian Church organized in such a large area. In the General Assembly minutes of 1842, you see the Presbytery of Florida appear for the first time in the statistics, listing 8 congregations with a total of 220 members. The 1837 split in the Presbyterian Church in the USA into the Old School and New School founded all Florida congregations aligned with the Old School. Old School Presbyterians generally favored missions and espoused a more formal Calvinistic theology. New School Presbyterians readily cooperated with other denominations and entered into interdenominational organizations. The Old School rescinded the 1801 Plan of Union with the Congregationalists. The New School generally supported anti-slavery causes, which most of the Old School did not. In the 19th century, social issues and social movements for change in American society impacted Presbyterians. In some instances, there was strong support by the church, such as temperance. For instance, there was a General Assembly Committee for Temperance and Moral Welfare. And alcohol consumption and drunkenness in particular was highly frowned upon. On other issues such as abolition and women's suffrage, there was great disagreement within the church. Immigration was also a thorny issue, as it continues to be today. Some of the images on this slide include a poster promoting prohibition, an image of a mob attacking Reverend Elijah Lovejoy and his printing press. Elijah Lovejoy was murdered in 1837 in Alton, Illinois. That's across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, for promoting anti-slavery views, and his printing press was burned down. The image in the lower right portion of the slide shows the cover of a pamphlet about nativist riots that broke out in Philadelphia in July of 1844. The riots were aroused by a rapid influx of Catholic immigrants from Ireland, Germany, and Southern European countries. Most Protestants in the United States, including Presbyterians, felt Catholic immigrants represented a threat to American religious, political, and economic life. We hold several 19th century newspapers in our collections that promote very strong anti-Catholic sentiments, such as like the Protestant Vindicator. If published today, these newspapers would be considered hate speech. Slavery persisted as the great moral problem of the United States. In 1787, the meeting of the Synod of New York and Philadelphia called for the gradual elimination of slavery. The General Assembly renewed this sentiment until a longer statement was issued in 1818, which softened the stance. While the issue continued to be raised at General Assemblies until the outbreak of the Civil War, the Old School Assembly did not take a strong stance against slaveholders and allowed them to remain in the church as full members. Presbyterians were certainly divided on this issue. Some supported the American Colonization Society, some the American Anti-Slavery Society. Others certainly defended slavery and felt it was not within the realm of the church to make pronouncements, and others who recognized the evils of slavery and hoped for a gradual solution to the problem. Henry Highland Garnet, seen on the slide here, was one of the most famous African-American orators in the period before the Civil War. He was born a slave in Maryland in 1815 and escaped with his family to New York City in 1824. After several years of private study, he was licensed to preach in 1842 by the Presbytery of Troy of the New School. He served as the pastor of the Liberty Street Presbyterian Church in Troy, New York, while actively working in the abolition movement. He roundly condemned the American churches for their failure to challenge slavery. Florida Presbyterians generally agreed with their leaders on this issue, who presented slavery as blessed by God, the Bible, and the Constitution of the United States. Many Florida Presbyterians, including ministers, owned slaves. Reverend William McCormick owned 10 slaves. He served as a stated supply pastor of the churches in Canapaha and Mycanopy. I don't know if I pronounced that right or not.
You're doing good.
Okay. From about 1859 to 1866. Lawyer Robert Davidson, who is the clerk of session at the First Presbyterian Church in Quincy for many years, owned 21 slaves, and ruling elder and judge John Charles McGehee owned 110 slaves.
Oof.
While slave owners constituted a small minority of the overall population of Florida, in general, Floridians did support the institution of slavery. A month after the attack on Fort Sumter, the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in the USA Old School convened in Philadelphia. A number of Southern commissioners did attend, inspiring some hope that the denomination would stay united by avoiding politics. However, Dr. Gardner Spring of New York pushed through a resolution of support for the Union cause, and the Southern commissioners withdrew from the assembly. Southerners argue that the Presbyterian Church as a spiritual body should refrain from making pronouncements of a purely political nature. That probably sounds familiar too to the current church. That's always been a perennial issue within like what's politics and what's religion. In December 1861, commissioners from the Southern Presbyteries met in Augusta, Georgia at the First Presbyterian Church to form what would become the Presbyterian Church in the Confederate States of America. Benjamin Palmer and theologian James Henley Thornwell exerted power over the deliberations of the new General Assembly. This is an image of Benjamin Palmer on the slide. He was the pastor at the First Presbyterian Church in New Orleans and was a staunch supporter of the institution of slavery. The body sent out the address of the Southern General Assembly to all the churches of Jesus Christ, which explained the reasons for the division of Presbyterians and made a vigorous defense of slavery, as well as the spirituality of the church. Presbyterians in the South asked for prayers for the Confederate cause. After the Confederate loss, the PCCSA became the Presbyterian Church in the US. In 1869, meeting separately for the last time, Old School and New School Presbyterians held their assemblies at the First and Third churches in Pittsburgh, where they approved reunion. Included on this slide is an artist's rendering of the reunion. In May of 1858, about a decade earlier, you have the United Presbyterian Church of North America, founded in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as well. The UPCNA denomination was formed by a merger of the General Synod of the Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church, which were sort of known as the Covenanters, and the Synod of the Associate Presbyterian Church, which were known as the Seceders. Included on this slide is the order of exercises related to their union. I mention this because in the mid-20th century, the Presbyterian Church in the USA, like the Northern Stream denomination, merged with the UPCNA to form the United Presbyterian Church in the USA. That's a lot of acronyms. Early in its existence, the PCUS, this is the Southern Stream denomination, formed its own national boards. At its very first General Assembly in 1861, the PCUS saw the organization of the Executive Committee for Foreign Missions, demonstrating the importance Presbyterians in the South placed on missionary endeavors. By 1870, there are 5 major boards of the denomination in place. In addition to the Executive Committee on Foreign Missions, you have the committees on sustentation, publication, and education, as well as trustees. The PCUS concentrated their foreign mission activity in 6 countries, predominantly. They were in China, Brazil, Mexico, Japan, the Congo, and Korea. This is a map of obviously the continent of Africa. very broadly showing what was the Belgian Congo at that time and where the mission stations were. Responding to the call for missionaries to the Congo by the PCUS General Assembly of 1889, Samuel Lapsley and William Shepherd set sail together in February 1890. The two men established Sunday school classes as well as writing and reading classes. After the sudden death of Samuel Lapsley in 1892, William Shepherd carried on the mission alone until other missionaries arrived in 1893. William Morrison arrived in 97, excuse me. He took a leading role in speaking out against human rights abuses perpetrated by King Leopold's Free State government. Morrison and Shepherd were tried for libel by the government, and their acquittal eventually helped bring about some reforms. The two images on this slide, and I apologize, they're probably a little bit hard to see. On the left, you have William Shepherd and his wife Lucy, as well as missionary Annie Taylor, standing in front of a long snake that thankfully is dead, showing some of the adventures of being a missionary. And then there's the photograph showing three native boys with their hands cut off, showing the atrocities of the Belgian government against the people of the Congo.
Mm.
The American Presbyterian Congo mission grew rapidly in the early 20th century, with PCUS missionaries organizing the Morrison Bible School for training native evangelists, a leprosy colony and hospital, and many schools and homes for children. By 1919, the APCM was the largest Protestant mission in the Congo, with 48 missionaries and nearly 20,000 communicants. We hold the personal papers of William Shepherd and William Morrison. As the population of Florida steadily increased during the 19th century, the growth of churches certainly followed. On March 18th, 1876, you had the first Presbyterian church in Orlando organized. Due to the growth in churches, in November 1877, the Synod of Georgia approved the formation of the Presbytery of St. John's. By 1890, there was a need for a third presbytery. So you had the Presbytery of Suwanee that was organized. And a year later, the Synod of Florida was established to oversee these presbyteries. By the 1950s, the Presbytery of St. John's was so large, it was divided into three presbyteries, and you had the organization of the Presbytery of Everglades and Westminster, both in 1955. Let's see, I'm trying to think. Following reunion in 1983 between the UPC USA and the Presbyterian Church in the US, there was a restructuring of mid-councils, and you had the Presbytery of Central Florida organized in 1985. Certainly, the studies of Charles Darwin stirred controversy in the church. Reverend Dr. James Woodrow, who was an uncle of Woodrow Wilson, was the Perkins Professor of Natural Science at Columbia Seminary. He cautiously supported an aspect of evolution while at the same time affirming the authority of the Bible. He argued that there was no contradiction between science and the scriptures. During the 1880s, Woodrow was constantly pressured to change his views. He refused and would not resign from the seminary staff. The PCUS General Assembly finally forced Woodrow's removal. He went on to teach at the University of South Carolina and became president there in 1894. Later, in the early 20th century, the fundamentalist modernist controversy erupted among Presbyterians. The fundamentalists insisted on the inerrancy of the Bible and strict adherence to the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Yeah, I heard it too. I went over there. I said, "What the hell is going on?"
I don't think, okay.
Somebody needs to.
Somebody has a clue. I don't know.
This is what you don't see. He's a dead snake.
Everybody needs to mute, please.
Lay the reg. So,
But the,
doors, make sure they lock. You know,
okay, the modernists felt the Bible and the confessions were open to interpretation and could be adapted to the times.
I don't know about any.
No, you're all right. You're all right. Snakes can slither down.
I can't quite figure out who.
They can get in one door. They can get into the second door. I mean, he had.
I have the right to. Can you hear me?
I can still hear you, yes.
Okay, I think sorry, I was trying to mute the person who I think was speaking. So I think I managed that, okay, but I'm not muted. Okay, perfect. My apologies, okay. So essentially, okay, so you have, the modernists who were sort of feeling the Bible and confessions were open to interpretation. Following his service as Secretary of State under the Wilson administration, William Jennings Bryan, who was a member of the First Presbyterian Church in Miami, Florida, drew large crowds for his popular Bryan Bible talks. The image on the left shows Bryan leading a Bible class in Miami, obviously outdoors. It kind of looks like quite a large group of people in attendance there. Certainly, I think most people probably know that Bryan was involved in the famous Scopes trial on evolution in Tennessee, arguing against the theory of evolution. The image on the right on the slide is titled "The Descent of the Modernists." Each step contains a modernist concept, such as Bible not infallible, no virgin birth, and no resurrection, until the bottom of the staircase, which is atheism. I think myself, I would fall within the fundamentalists. I don't know about you folks. In the early 20th century, the Federal Council of the Churches of Christ was organized to promote a spirit of fellowship, service, and cooperation among the Christian churches of the United States. Initially comprised of 33 Protestant denominations, the FCC became the National Council of the Churches of Christ in 1950. Both the Presbyterian Church in the USA and the Presbyterian Church in the US played a major role in this organization over the years. Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated President of the United States in 1913. Wilson was a Presbyterian elder and grew up in the the PCUS congregation in Staunton, Virginia. During his administration, Wilson came out in support of women's suffrage. However, he supported segregation. In the early 20th century, PCUS women began to take their first halting steps toward organization. Prejudice proved the greatest hindrance to organized women's work. The 1880 General Assembly of the PCUS stated that the denomination would not tolerate women preaching from its pulpits. This action received subsequent reaffirmation for the next 40 years. The denomination did not object to women speaking and leading prayer in their own groups, but they could not speak in mixed assembly, insisting that public speaking in the promiscuous assembly of the congregation or church is contrary to the holy oracles and therefore should be prohibited and condemned by the presbyteries and church session. Because of these prevailing attitudes, the women of the Presbyterian Church in the US formed organizations only on the local level. Haley Paxson Winsborough was instrumental in persuading the PCUS General Assembly to approve the organization of the Women's Auxiliary in 1912. the first national women's organization in the Southern denomination. Her interests involved home and foreign missions and interdenominational and race relations. The first church-wide meeting of women in the PCUS took place in Atlanta in 1912. The image on the right top side is a group, the group of women meeting from a newspaper article. The work of auxiliaries often involved prayer, study, and giving for all the various causes of the church. St. John's Presbytery established the first Presbyterial organization in Florida. There were 6 women from Sanford, 2 from Silver Lake, and 3 from Orlando that met on November 7th, 1893, and named themselves Women's Home and Foreign Missionary Union of St. John's Presbytery. The Florida Presbytery organized a women's group in 1907. In 1915, the Synod approved the bylaws of the Florida Women's Synodical. The early work of the Synodical met several obstacles, including World War I, the influenza epidemic, and a severe hurricane. The Florida Auxiliary made progress, though. It established a committee on interracial relationships. In 1925, Presbyterian women began holding conferences for Black women at Hungerford Normal School in Eatonville. One unpleasant result was a threatening message from the Ku Klux Klan sent to Mrs. W.G. Thompson, who is the leader of the project. The Women's Auxiliary became the Women of the Church in 1948 in the PCUS, and obviously it's now the current Presbyterian Women. I believe in the image in the top right, you can see Mrs. Thompson. I believe she's the woman in the front row on the far left. That's Mrs. Thompson. And that's a picture of Hallie Winsborough on the bottom of the slide. Other Presbyterian denominations slowly removed the restrictions against women's ordination over the course of the 20th century. The United Presbyterian Church of North America ordained women deacons beginning in 1906, and the Presbyterian Church in the USA followed suit in 1924. A few years later, in 1930, the PCUS General Assembly approved the ordination of women as ruling elders. And in 1955, the denomination opened ordination to the ministry to women. I think there's an image of Margaret Towner at the top, ordained by the PCUSA. The Presbyterian Church in the US approved the ordination of women as deacons, elders, and ministers in 1964. The first female ordained to the ministry in the PCUS was Rachel Henderlight. She's pictured in the lower right, and we hold her papers at PHS. The United States experienced a boom in the years following World War II with the rapid growth of suburbs necessitating new church development. In early 1955, the PCUS Synod of Florida divided St. John's again, like into Everglades in Westminster. In the early 1950s, there were 166 PCUS congregations in Florida and 64 PCUSA churches across the state. Overall, the denomination of the PCUS had 3,733 churches, while the PCUSA had 8,336 churches. While the PCUSA had at least one congregation in every state, most PCUS churches were concentrated in Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri, the Carolinas, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, and Oklahoma. The civil rights movement had a significant impact on the church. In 1953, the PCUS started a Negro work campaign at the request of the Board of Church Extension to raise $2 million to fund African American churches, ministers, and educational institutions. The campaign ended in 1957 with $1,930,000 raised. 16 new congregations were organized and 24 new church buildings were funded. About half of the funds went to Stillman College. Each church in the PCUS was encouraged to pledge funds to this campaign. The Washington Shores Presbyterian Church in Orlando was the first Black church organized in the Presbytery of St. John's in 1957. It's not entirely clear to me if they received funding through this program, but it seems likely. Overall, the presbyteries in the Synod of Florida gave about $75,000 to the campaign. And again, this was taking place in the mid-1950s. The Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision in 1954 to desegregate the nation's public school system led both the PCUS and the PCUSA to move away from segregated mid-councils. While the PCUS General Assembly made a statement in support of the Supreme Court decision, this does not mean that all members of the denomination fully supported desegregation efforts. And again, we're sort of back at the topic of church unions and splits. There were talks of union of the three largest Presbyterian denominations in the early 1950s. You did in 1958 have the PCUSA and the United Presbyterian Church of North America decide to unite. And again, they formed the United Presbyterian Church in the USA. At that time, the PCUS still did not feel comfortable with reuniting. They felt that there were still, I think, too many issues that they were divided on, and they didn't want to enter into that. So that didn't happen until 1983. In the General Assembly in 1973 for the PCUS, saw conflicts occurring in their denomination, and you had the Presbyterian Church in America sort of split off and form their own denomination. I think that helped sort of bring about the reunion that took place in 1983, because I think more of the traditional, very conservative folks were breaking off from the church at that time. By 1982, you had Evangelical Presbyterian Church sort of splitting off from the Northern Stream Church. The picture on the slide shows the parade in Atlanta, Georgia in 1983, following the reunion to form what is the current denomination. And I'm sure, as everyone knows, that in 2010, there was, yet another split with ECHO being formed on disagreements related to, I believe it was Amendment A, with allowing openly gay ministers to, to serve in the church, and that controversy. Okay. So again, yeah, you have the current church here that obviously you have all these different constituencies in the church sort of seeking out their roles. I think it's important to try to keep the church as united as possible, because it's often helpful to have people with differing views and outlooks in the church. Make sure I'm doing okay with time here. Okay. Bringing me back to the Presbyterian Historical Society. Again, we sort of aim to collect all of this history in its various forms. There is no charge to deposit records with us. Congregations in mid-councils continue to own their records and may request their return at any time. We provide digitization services for a fee. We do offer several heritage preservation grants each year to congregations to help cover the cost of digitization. Under normal times, right now, COVID, we're operating on a somewhat restricted schedule, but normally we host hundreds of in-house researchers each year, and we do field about 3,000 reference inquiries annually. In some instances, our staff can conduct research for individual congregations and mid-councils. We also, like for instance, offer a biographical research service about ministers and missionaries if congregations need information about some of their former pastors and whatnot. I hope I've demonstrated that I think, Presbyterian history is very much American history and vice versa. I hope this workshop may have encouraged you to take a closer look at your own history and where you fell in terms of some of these issues within American society over the years. So I've appreciated the opportunity to speak to you today. For more information, you can certainly contact us. Again, we're in Philadelphia. We have our email and our website and our phone. So you're welcome to contact us. I guess I can stop. I don't know if you want me to stop sharing my screen now. I don't know if folks have, let's see.
Well, Lisa, this is Doug Lawton. Just some very personal responses to your great presentation is that what your very first picture of the Historical Society, unfortunately, did not highlight the big statues. Having been privileged to be a member of Old Pine Street Church, which shares the property with the Historical Society. And what for a lot of people don't know is that the Historical Society is on Lombard, which is one block off of South Street. Now, South Street in Philadelphia is this wonderful, eclectic street full of all kinds of things, including many restaurants and bars. And I just want to say, not that it was personal, but if you're stumbling back from South Street home and you about late Friday night, early Saturday morning, and you walk by the Historical Society, and there are these three about 10 or 15 foot high cement statues of our founders, who are obviously looking down at you with these big scowls because of that you've been part of. They were very scary at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'll tell you that. But it is, and the Historical Society is a wonderful thing. And Lisa, what you may not mention though, right around the corner in Old Pine Street Church are the graves of most of those signers of the Declaration of Independence. They're in the churchyard, and they're fascinating to see. But and then the only other thing I wanted to mention, not that I understood, but I love the picture you showed of the march on the unification in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And if you could have done a super zoom into the building that was in the middle of the background, you could see me standing there watching it. It was really an amazing thing to see that literally thousands of people coming together. There was the one stream from PCUS and the other stream from the Northern Church USA coming and then meeting up and joining forces. It was really very moving. And thank you very much for all of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you could have been there. Like you're all part of, you're all very much part of the history and rewriting the history of how, where the church is today and where it should go in the future. they're important decisions. Obviously, and I'm not a historian. And the Presbyterian church history is fascinating, and it's wildly complicated. All of the, various splits, like when those divisions would get so to a point where they just felt like, no, we can't find compromise, and we can't work together. We have to, split apart. Often, eventually, over time, what divided people has resolved itself, and they come back together, and then other issues present themselves. But it's fascinating stuff. Yeah, if people haven't been to the Historical Society, if you're ever in Philadelphia, it's a great place to visit. It's really impressive. So Mary Bell,
Yes, I just wanted to thank you too, that I learned so much more, and I've studied the Presbyterian history, but as a Presbyterian woman and past moderator of the Synod in Presbyterian women, we were always told to send our records to Columbia Seminary, and their archives are phenomenal too. So what happens? Do you share them, or what I don't know what happens. I mean, do we send them to Philadelphia, or we continue sending them to Columbia?
Essentially, that's a good question. Thank you for bringing that up, Mary. I know within the Southern Stream denomination, within like the Women's Auxiliary, and Presbyterian women in the South had that very strong commitment to sort of writing annual histories, whereas you didn't have that tradition in the Northern Stream Church. So it was decided at some point that the histories of congregations would generally go to Columbia Theological Seminary, to their archives. Typically, we will take in the histories for the Presbyterian Synod level women, but congregation histories go to Columbia. And yes, my understanding is they have very impressive collections there as well. I've never been able to visit, but
you would enjoy it.
So
Thank you very much.
And then in terms of some of you folks, I guess we still have, a little bit of time before, the session ends. Like what congregations are you members of right now? And like, what is your background with coming into the Presbyterian church?
Well, I'm a charter member of Wekiva Presbyterian, which was chartered in 1977. Okay. And so it's been a privilege and a pleasure. And I have, because of that, have studied some of the history too. So it's in Longwood, Florida. So, but you did very well with your pronunciations. It's
okay.
You didn't have to say Kissimmee, right?
So.
Hi, we're Clifton and Karen Smith from Pineda Presbyterian Church in Melbourne. My interest, I was a little interested in, I couldn't write it down fast enough, for the female firsts in the Presbyterian Church. I got as far as 1956, when the PCUSA ordained its first elder. I think there was another
that was a minister. Yeah, 56 minister.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. Margaret Towner was the first woman ordained as a minister.
Okay.
In
1930, it ordained women as elders.
Elders, yes, in 1930.
Then 1956, it ordained the first minister.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. I'm a deacon, so I'd like to get it right for tell all my other co-deacons.
Sure. I think women have played such a strong role in the church, like really from the beginning. They often tend to be a majority of the members, and they just at the local level certainly do so much to keep our congregations operating and functioning. And they just but in terms of like the upper level, they just were not allowed to be there.
We have a big, we have a pretty good Presbyterian women in our church, the gatherings, and we have all that. So we're doing good. The presentation was great, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I thought so too. I really was impressed with the presentation. I'm a member of United Presbyterian in Daytona Beach, but I have been in the Presbyterian church all of my life. I was born into the church. My parents actually were Presbyterian missionaries and worked at some Presbyterian colleges and were responsible for that kind of thing. And so I've always seen the leadership in grandmothers and aunts, who've gone to the General Assembly and things like that. So I was very impressed with the history part, and then I grew up in the Synod of Alaska Northwest as a child, and that was a very strong presbytery for women. So it was just impressive to see the historical information that you provided, and in our church, I think there's a few of us that have been in the church all of our lives. I know my dad, who's in his late 80s, has been a member of the church, Presbyterian church, since 1940. So, it's just great to see the historical reverence, and it brings back a lot of memories.
Okay. That's wonderful. Thank you. And I know that's wonderful that you have family, members who've been missionaries. I think that to me is the collections that we have related to mission work are just phenomenal and enormous. I can't even, just enormous, the amount of the volume of records we have, because the Presbyterians have just, to me, such a strong missional church, like really going out to spread the gospel. That's always been, I think, at the core of who they are in many respects. And yeah, if your family has papers, if you have papers for your relatives from their mission work and whatnot, we would love to be able to have those in our collections.
That's good to know.
Yeah, researchers use those materials a lot. They really do. Probably the vast majority of researchers that come in person, I would say likely 40 to 50% are probably doing topics related somehow to mission work.
Wow. Yes, thank you again.
Well, I know I've talked too much, but I will just say that I was also privileged for another bit of Presbyterian history, that in the 80s and 90s, I lived in Atlanta and attended Morningside Presbyterian Church, and the associate pastor, the parish associate, was the Reverend Dr. Lawrence Bottoms. And if you research that, Dr. Bottoms, I was going to say, he was the first African-American moderator of the Southern Church. And let me tell you, what an extraordinary man. I will tell you the one thing that he taught me that I just thought, because he was teaching our Sunday school, and he mentioned that he went to Montreat in the 60s for a ministers meeting and had to eat in the kitchen while all of his white pastoral friends ate in the dining room. He was forced to eat in the kitchen. And I asked him, I said, Dr. Bottoms, how do you maintain, your connection to the church when you suffer such discrimination? And he said, and I always have to do this in a very deep voice, because he had a very deep voice. And he said, well, Doug, he says, God calls his church to be a God institution. Unfortunately, it remains a human institution and makes mistakes. And it has inspired me for years on that. But Dr. Bottoms was just an extraordinary man and a great part of Presbyterian history.
You're right, he was. And I never did have the opportunity to meet him, but I am familiar with what you said about Montreat. In fact, when my mom used to go on speaking engagements from the church, that was one place she never went to. because it was always, I know in the 50s, it was mentioned about, you know, having to drain out the swimming pool and things, you know, after people of color used it. So it's always kind of had a dark history, so that you'll find sometimes that people won't go to conferences and things there even today because of what, you know, the history that the church in Montreat had. One of my ministers here in Daytona was actually, had been a minister in Montreat and grew up there. So he kind of brought a different spin to things. But yeah, there was a lot there. It is a lot of places, but historically there's a lot, you know, in the African-American community about the injustice with the church that happened there.
Thank you, Davida.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I see, you know, certainly, you know, yeah, there's enough, I guess, guilt and responsibility to go around everywhere. Certainly from the very beginning, there's, you know, they always, I think Presbyterians sort of othered anyone that didn't fit into the sort of the WASP category. And you can't just get away from that. Like when you snap your fingers, you can't just suddenly say, oh, now we want to be welcoming. And people are going to forget that. They're not going to forget that. That really carries on deeply for people, you know, it continues, you know, people will say, well, why aren't people wanting to come to this? Well, that's why. And, you know, until you can really reckon with that history, truly reckon with it, I think it's, you know, not fully understanding your history, it's problematic, you know, like what's going on in our country right now with education and people being resistant to wanting to really honestly examine the true history of the United States. Like if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to really move forward in an honest and healthy way. So it's always odd sometimes with archives, like we're not trying, you know, again, I think I'd mentioned, you know, like newspapers like the Protestant Vindicator, we don't hold on to it because we're trying to promote that was honestly happening. So unless you document that, people can say, oh, that didn't really happen. You know, it wasn't that bad. Things, you know, no, I mean, you have to document all of that stuff. You know, like the Congo mission photos that are part of the William Shepard papers, you know, that those atrocities were happening. And it's, you know, it's hard to see those types of images, but that was the reality. And so Presbyterians are part of history the way all of us are. You know, there's good things that have been done, and there are some terrible things that have been done. But you try to understand it all and keep moving forward. So hopefully, I don't know if I can shut off the recording thing now or not. We're coming close to noontime and everyone's probably getting hungry and and thirsty and needing a bit of a break. But I appreciate you coming to the session and being so attentive. And it was nice to be here with you today. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.